PG Semester 3. On behalf of the department, I, as it said, welcome you all to this particular semester and your classes. Comments from today. You all know what each teacher is supposed to teach. I am going to start my assignments as I have already notified you with a discussion of post-colonial theory. We all know in the paper ENGL 301 that is devoted to criticism and theory, we have a unit with 2 essays. In fact, one is not an essay proper. Edward W. Said has written arguably the most significant and influential of all treatises on post-colonial theory, namely Orientalism. Now, Introduction to Orientalism is the piece that we have selected for your study. Similarly, so far as Homi K. Bhabha is concerned, his essay taken from his location of culture that we have on our PG syllabus is entitled Of Mimicry and Man. Now, these are the 2 essays that we will have to discuss. While discussing these 2 essays, we are going to tackle post-colonial theory. Now, post-colonial theory, post-colonialism, post-colonial criticism, these are related terms, but not absolutely synonymous with one another. May I repeat? Post-colonialism, post-colonial criticism, and post-colonial theory. These are 3 interrelated terms, even though they are not synonymous. They are not to be confused with one another. Now, post-colonialism, post-colonial criticism, and post-colonial theory are the 3 terms that I have mentioned. Let us take up for discussion the first term, post-colonialism. You know, this is basically a word that has many separate parts, separable parts, prefixes and suffixes. In this context, I must tell you that post-colonialism is composed of the stem word colony. There are 2 suffixes. First, IAL, yal, and then ism. And there is one prefix, post. Now, I am not going to talk about the structure of the word, whether we should write it with a hyphen or as a solid word, because that discussion will come in its proper place. Sufficing to say that in the word post-colonialism, there is the prefix post and two suffixes -al and -ism. Okay, let's drop the prefix for the time being. What are we left with? We are left with the word colonialism. Now, even in this particular word, there is a stem word, that is colony, and two suffixes -al and -ism. The first suffix -al, we know kal, ikal, ial, al, these are adjective suffixes. If you add, usually, if you add these suffixes to a particular word, we usually get an adjective. Colonial, for example, is a word composed of the stem word colony. Colony is a settlement. And then colonial, IAL means of or relating to. So colonial means of the colony or related to the colony. And then ism, ISM. You know, ism is a discourse, a system of arguments. And it is a noun prefix, a noun suffix. You know, so colonialism means a system of argument that believes in or propagates the existence of the colony. So obviously, it is associated with the colonial condition. The fact that there is or there are colony or colonies, as the case may be. And its discursive existence is something that colonialism propagates. Discursive significance of the colony. So, colonialism propagated, promoted, advocated what? The existence of the colony as well as the desirability of the colony. Now, we can very easily understand that the desirability of a colony, whether a colony should be desirable, obviously, it will have to be decided by the settlers who actually establish and maintain that colony. Now, when we talk about colonialism, imperialism, while we are students of literature, culture, political science, history, economics, and philosophy, we know that colonialism refers to a historical fact. Now, when we talk about colony and empire, in the modern sense of the term, we always talk about a post-Renaissance, post-Enlightenment phase in the history of the world. Usually, we can be very specific. There are exceptions. I am not talking about those exceptions. Usually, for all intents and purposes, colonies were established by, founded by the Europeans, the Westerners. Later on, even by Americans. But basically by Westerners, the Europeans. And where did they found those colonies? Either in Asia or in Australasia, or Australia, or in Latin America, there is South America, or in the West Indies, or in Africa. So usually Europeans established colonies. But while talking about it, we should not forget this particular fact as well, that the Europeans established a colony or several colonies in mainland America, North America as well. The place or the land that we today call the United States of America, regions of that particular country were at one time or another colonized by one of 3 to 4 European powers. The French, the English, the Dutch, and in some cases, the Spaniards. So, what I am trying to point out is that we are, while talking about colonialism and while talking about post-colonialism, we are actually thinking of a particular historical process and a particular historical reality that corresponds to a particular epoch, a historical period. We all know, while talking about the Renaissance, we are taught that the Renaissance led to unprecedented human movement from one country to another within Europe. And also across the seas. Sea exploration by people like Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, Hudson, Vasco da Gama, and so on and so forth. We all know about that. So any discussion of colonialism can be reasonably certain we are that while talking about colonialism, we can think about certain dates, at least certain periods, from the Renaissance onwards till the 20th century, mid 20th century maybe. So from the, say, 16th century till the early 16th century till the mid 20th century. A bit earlier as well. Now, when I discuss this particular fact, you, my dear friends, may ask me a very pertinent question. Sir, you are talking about a large-scale human movement, migration, dislocation, relocation, emigration, and so forth and so forth, so on and so forth. But Do you think, sir, that this is something absolutely new or unprecedented? My answer will be no and yes. Partially no and partially yes. I am not trying to flummox or baffle you. What I am trying to point out is the fact that man has moved not as individual but as community or communities. Man has moved from one place to another from the days of yore, from the very, very beginning. A nomadic streak is very much there in our character as human beings. That the Germans called Wanderlust, or in the anglicized way, we can call it wanderlust. Lust for wandering from one place to another. And we can think about no less a personage from Greek mythology as Odysseus or Ulysses. If we would like to call him as the Romans did. The Aryans, for example, according to the majority of historical, archaeological, and anthropological scholars, the Aryans came from outside, from Asia Minor, maybe. They settled down among other places. In ancient India, in the Indus Valley. We all know about these things. From Sindhu comes Hindu. And also India, Indus. So, we can also talk about Rabindranath's famous lines. Hethay Arjo, Hethay Onarjo, Hethay Dravid Chin, Shok Hun Dol, Pathan Mughal, Ek Deho Holo Lin. So people have come and settled down in particular lands from times immemorial. Then what is the difference? What is the uniqueness of this particular colonial epoch? Why are we actually studying it as a separate thing that is important enough to merit inclusion in the PG syllabus? You know, usually man came from one place to another with a view to plundering, in search of fodder, in search of food, in search of wealth. But a systematic rule on a large area of the world based on ideological as well as repressive physical or military means was not there earlier. You know, there was an ideological basis, and that basis was very strong behind colonialism, the colonial endeavor. Why? Because now The Westerners came with a civilizing mission as well as a ruling mission. To civilize the savages and to rule them and to plunder the resources of their country in order to satisfy the craving for raw materials that industry and the common public of the mother countries were after. This was something that was unprecedented. Now, the thing that we need to remember is that as I was telling you, there was both a repressive and a clearly ideological basis for this particular colonial project and process. We all know how Christianity played a big role. When the Aryans came, conversion of the non-Aryans into the Aryan fold through Sanskritization and Brahminization, this was enforced in most cases. But in the case of the Western domination over large parts of Asia, Africa, America, and the other places, excepting Europe, we have to understand that this particular process had an ideological basis, not only religious, but also a socio-cultural dimension was there. It had got much to do with the question of representation. How we were represented and how the people from the colonies, they also were affected. Representation, how they were typecast, how they were stereotyped, how they were represented by Western writers is something that needs to be looked into in a proper way. This is by way of the absolute beginner primer to you. Now, if we think about India or Southeast Asia, we have to understand that the most dominant European and Western powers who the colonial project were the French and the English. Started by others, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and so on and so forth. But so far as actual domination of areas is concerned, obviously we have to understand that these places were first visited by the Westerners as traders. Then from one trade privilege to another, similarly, there was another aspect to this. What is that? I am talking about the subtle ways in which the colonizers tried to rule the minds of the colonized in these places. How did they do this? By calling the colonized savage, irresponsible, uncultured, uncivilized, dissolute, and all that. So in a way, much ideological investment had been needed to kickstart and maintain the colonial process. And how did it actually operate? Historically, as well as psychologically, will be discussed by two of the major writers, two of the major critics of postcolonial studies, namely Edward W. Said and Homi K. Bhabha. One Palestinian American, another of Indian origin, now settled in the West. So this is something that we will discuss in greater detail in the subsequent classes. I have already circulated the texts of both Introduction to Orientalism and of Mimicry and Man. I hope bold and foolhardy enough to try to read these particular texts. Okay, I think Shamim should take a screenshot of the attendance.
Okay, sir.
And with this, we come to the end of today's class. Thank you for being with us. Bye for now.